Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, November 3rd, 2015. We're getting into the week here. We have lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now then, quick program note. Thursday, our third hour guest will be Yusuf Rashid. He's trying to crowdfund a GMO-free chain of stores. We were talking to him. I think it's a really good idea. I'm very concerned about this story where they're putting the blame for this E. coli outbreak on Chipotle. And I think there's an economic bias there because of Chipotle's anti-GMO stance. Because as I understand it, there's been a huge recall of packaged beef for E. coli contamination, and the beef went to a lot of places besides Chipotle. And just like Volkswagen was targeted on the emissions cheating, even though other companies are doing it, I think there's a political agenda at work here. Now then, let's catch up to date on the Metrojet crash. There is a huge amount of propaganda going on, just like we saw with Flight 17 and Flight 370, a lot of confusion out there. And let's start with what we actually do know that has been established. Metrojet was in serious economic trouble, had a whole history of safety violations, including another fatal accident, the tail strike on this particular aircraft 14 years ago, had not paid its staff for 2 months. The maintenance contract with Egypt Air had expired 3 months ago. The co-pilot's wife went public saying that her husband, before the fatal flight, was complaining about the poor condition of the aircraft. Now, as I said, the propaganda is flowing out there. There was one story saying, oh, the bodies were burned and riddled with shrapnel, and obviously it was an explosion and terror, blah, 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 blah. And the official investigation came out and said, look, there's been no information released yet about the condition of the bodies. People are just making this stuff up. There's rumor mongering going on. And the agenda, amazingly enough, I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. There are stories all over. The one I'm using here is the Daily Mail. They're trying to blame Putin for this by saying if Putin hadn't gone into Syria, ISIS wouldn't have destroyed this jet. All those people on board that jet, it's all Putin's fault. Like they tried to blame him for Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. That's the propaganda spin. This is all Putin's fault. Bad Putin. Bad Putin. Now, the evidence so far is consistent with a major mechanical fault. Story coming out of Sputnik News. Fatigue crack might be the cause of deadly A321 crash in Egypt. And apparently Karl Mundell, a Czech pilot employed by Airbus, said that looking at the photos there, he saw a crack on the auxiliary power unit that appeared to be a fatigue crack. And we know fatigue is a real problem, especially in high-cycle aircraft. Now, to a pilot and an aircraft company, a cycle is takeoff to altitude to landing. That's a cycle. And if you have a high-cycle aircraft, they wear out much faster than aircraft that take off, fly really long distances, and then land, because it's this constant flexing of the fuselage from the internal pressure. We had an incident many years ago here in Hawaii where one of our inter-island flights, which because it's only a few hundred miles between the islands, they acquire cycles very, very quickly. And the entire top of a cabin literally blew off this airplane, took a stewardess with it, and they landed and found fatigue cracks all over the place. It is a reality in aircraft. Now, reiterating that so far the official investigation is saying they have found absolutely no trace of explosive residue on the crashed aircraft. Now, there's another story that came out in The Independent in Great Britain where they're reporting that the audio recorder, the cockpit voice recorders, are reported to have revealed unusual sounds moment before the jet disappeared. And the Russian experts are saying the sounds in the cockpit preceding the loss of contact with the aircraft are uncharacteristic of a standard flight. Now look for what should be there and isn't, and what isn't is the report of any kind of an explosion. So what this audio recording is telling us, it's that something changed the behavior of the aircraft and changed the sound. Now, if you recall the altitude data provided by Flight Radar 24, it showed a sudden climb preceding the dive. And from these two pieces of evidence, it looks like we're back to that tail section of the aircraft starting to separate, starting at the bottom of the fuselage, which would lower the angle of attack on the horizontal stabilizers, which would put the aircraft into a climb. The added turbulence from the empennage being out of alignment would account for the sound recorded on the cockpit recorder. And so I think that's what happened. More about that in a bit. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Steve in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, yeah, I hope you're right about all this. When I initially heard the report about that plane going down, the first thing that came to my mind is the U.S. is involved in some way. But hopefully they're not.
I don't think they are. I mean, airplanes crash for.
The U.S. says you got to fight terrorism, but they're the biggest terroristic country there is. They're bomb striking one country and overthrowing governments.
Well, the U.S. is funding ISIS and Al Qaeda and Al Nusra. The United States is now having to admit to the world they are state sponsors of terror.
Look, everything they say is complete opposite. They say they want strong school system, yet they're dumbing down the children. The health care, they say they want good health care, but they actually don't want good health care because there's no money. Everything they say is complete opposite. I feel like I'm in Twilight Zone.
Yeah, or Alice in Wonderland. We've got an Alice in Wonderland government. Off with their heads. Off with their heads. Whatever. Okay.
Yeah, it's one crazy world. I just want to make that point.
Well, again, in the case of the Metrojet crash, I mean, their airplanes sometimes crash for very ordinary, mundane, banal reasons. Poor maintenance, faulty parts, counterfeit parts has become a big, big problem for airlines, where there's a shortage of parts for certain aircraft models like the 777. And so it's an opportunity for people to just whip up parts in their local machine shop and sell them, but they're not able to stand the strain that a real from the original manufacturer part is going to do. And, when you have a counterfeit part on your car, big deal, you stall, you pull over to the side, you call a tow truck. When you have a counterfeit part on an aircraft at 30,000 feet and it lets go, bad things are going to happen.
Yeah, and when I initially heard the report about Obama saying he's going to send troops over, then that just happened. The first thing I thought was it had to be the U.S. Maybe we gave them weapons or something, but
okay,
it's a crazy world.
All righty, let's see. I'm looking at another report just now coming in from TASS, and again, it is reiterating no explosive residue has been found on the aircraft wreckage. Steve, I'm going to let you go here. We're coming up on a commercial break. And I'm looking at another story here where The Guardian is reporting that Russia's transport safety watchdog, their equivalent of the FAA, has ordered Metrojet to ground their entire fleet of Airbus A321s until the cause of the disaster was established. Clearly, the Russians think it's a mechanical failure, and they get the benefit of the doubt, because from Russia's point of view, if it was an attack by ISIS, it would justify Russia's increased escalation in Iraq and Syria. And so, again, they didn't lie to us about Saddam's nuclear weapons. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, there was another story that came out. This was on NBC, where U.S. intelligence agents are reporting that satellites working for the U.S. government detected a sudden heat flash from the area where the Russian jet lost communication with the ground and began to crash. They said they didn't see any missile, but there was definitely heat flash. Now, of course, when an airplane is breaking up and the fuel unloads and ignites, you're going to get a heat flash. We all remember what it looked like when those planes were crashing into the World Trade Towers. And at that particular point on its flight, just at the end of the climb out, ready for cruise. The plane still has about half of the fuel load that it took off with. And there's a lot of violence going on in the Sinai, plus you had Israel and the U.S. having that huge air defense exercise just to the east, across the border. A lot of sources for flashes. But they're trying to imply, could have been a bomb, could have been a bomb. By the way, have you noticed how quickly we're all getting the black box and satellite data on this crash as compared with, shall we say, Malaysian Airlines Flight 17? Funny. Just weird how the experiences are so different here. Boy, the Russians know how to get the job done, don't they? Now, Obama is responding to criticisms regarding his announcement that he's going to send in special forces to Syria to basically stand next to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the hopes that Russia will not bomb them anymore. And I would not want to be one of those Americans that the president is gambling with, that the Russians will hold back on there. And because Obama had promised no boots on the ground for something like 16 times, a lot of people are saying, well, we got boots on the ground. And Obama actually came out saying deploying special forces to Syria is not boots on the ground. I don't know. Maybe he gave them all ballet slippers or something. But they are on the ground in some kind of footwear. And Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes said, yes, they will be in combat. And I got to tell you, I am very insulted that Obama actually came out with this statement and thought, we, the American people, are going to say, oh, yes, if the president says it doesn't mean boots on the ground, then it doesn't mean boots on the ground. We shouldn't think that he was a liar for all those other times. Anyway, 7 Al-Qaeda affiliated commanders killed by the Syrian army in one day. They're starting to make a huge amount of progress. Now, the Russian Air Force and the Syrian opposition are now cooperating on a joint action against the terrorists. And so far, the opposition has provided coordinates on 24 terrorist targets in Syria. They're starting to turn on each other. Now, the good news is that finally Russian and U.S. air groups are practicing drills in order to prevent mid-air proximity over Syria. They're basically practicing exercises. When they are told that there is an aircraft from the other side, they will do this to basically prove that they're non-belligerent, not get into a shooting war with each other, which would be a really good thing. Personally, I think the U.S. government is afraid to have a one-on-one match between any U.S. warplane and the current Russian warplanes. For the same reason they skedaddled the Teddy Roosevelt out of the Gulf when the Russian ships showed up after that debacle with the Donald Cook. America's military might, its reputation, is based on how much money is poured into it. And when we look at the poor quality of what we're getting, how little bang we get for the buck, it may be more bluff than actual bite. I'm mixing my metaphors there. I think that's the reason that Canada pulled their aircraft out of Syria. They don't want to risk getting into a fight with a Russian plane and lose in front of the world. Now then, the Syria talks in Vienna have issued their final declaration on the results, and they came out with a list basically saying Syria's territory has to be preserved, the rights of all people have to be preserved, and the future of Syria is up to the Syrian people. There was nothing in this agreement, agreed to by all participants, that puts any kind of a time limit on the continued presidency of Bashar al-Assad. The U.S. is still pushing that, however, unilaterally, and Syrian Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal al-Maghdad said, no, this is nonsense. Assad was voted into office, and when he's voted out, he will leave. Meanwhile, the United States is still stonewalling on allowing an independent review of just how it came to bomb that hospital up in Afghanistan. Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry is saying, and this is true, the efforts by the United States to bring about regime change in Syria is on the verge of becoming a global-scale disaster. And, of course, they're talking primarily about the flood of refugees into Europe and all the problems that that's causing. It's either completely out of control or it's part of that larger agenda to destroy national sovereignty everywhere and declare the New World Order. We will run the planet for you. And we will do a much, much better job than you could possibly do for yourself. Meanwhile, Russia has sent 100,000 tons of wheat as humanitarian aid to Syria, which I think is a lot more humanitarian aid than the U.S. sent. Actually, all the U.S. has been sending is bombs, bullets, drones. What's interesting is some documents have surfaced from all the way back in 1957, where U.S. diplomat in Syria was saying, we should never intervene in Syria. Russia will protect its independence. And if we get ourselves involved in this mess, it will never end. This was said in 1957. And here we are, 2015. Now, the bluff and bluster is continuing from the U.S. government, as reported in The Guardian. Ashton Carter is predicting there will be terrorist reprisal attacks on Russian soil because Putin dared to go into Syria. And I'm sure they're booking the flights for ISIS and Al-Qaeda right now and going to Hotels.com, get them some nice accommodations in Moscow. Because these terrorists work for the U.S. government. We never negotiate with terrorists. We don't have to. They're on our payroll. Meanwhile, down in Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei is saying that basically, as far as he can tell, despite the P5+1, there has been no reduction in U.S. hostility, which reflects Israeli hostility toward Iran. Got to take a break. Back with a phone call after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Thank you very much for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, isn't it amazing how they can have a satellite picking up a flash of light, but they can't find ISIS driving miles-long convoys with brand-new black uniforms and white pickup trucks given to them by the State Department through the FSA?
Oh, well, remember when they were showing us the satellite pictures that proved Russian artillery and tanks were in Ukraine, and they were blurry and low resolution, and then when they started showing the satellite pictures of Russian aircraft arriving in Syria, they were crystal clear and sharp, and you could almost count the fasteners on the wings of the aircraft.
Yeah, Mike, if this was a bomb, I mean, this is going to change the dynamic a lot. I mean, I don't know, they're going to have to start putting out the FSB out there to do some assassinations in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They have to, you know, because they can't let these, this is one of the reasons why they want all these refugees spreading out too, because they can have some infiltrations to go across Europe, and which will go into, you know,
there's no question. There's no security checks on these people. I mean, there's probably tons of agent provocateurs in these refugees streaming into Europe. Once they're in Europe, you know, a couple of cans of gasoline and you start causing all kinds of a ruckus. I mean, it's an absolute disaster for Europe. And there's no question we're in a time of extreme global chaos, and it's being fanned up for various agendas. Now, getting on back to Russia, as I mentioned before, Russia would probably benefit if it turned out the Metrojet was brought down by a terrorist bomb. They've already ruled out a missile. And again, now they're saying officially, no trace of explosives on the bodies of the passengers. So that's where we are on that one. But Russia would be able to escalate what they're doing in Iraq and Syria, and nobody would say boo, you know, if ISIS took the fall for this. Now we know that Metrojet itself, of course, is looking at major liability and negligence litigation, possible criminal charges against their management. So, of course, they're out there pounding as hard as they can. Terrorists, 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 because that'll get them off the hook. And, of course, as I mentioned before, the propaganda spin now is that this is all Putin's fault because he went into Syria. And
yeah,
Ashton Carter's out there. Ashton Carter's saying there's going to be reprisal attacks all over Russia. Okay, where are the reprisal attacks here in the United States? Because the U.S. invaded Syria first. In fact, the U.S. is the only invader of Syria. Russia is there at the invitation of Syria's legitimate government.
Exactly. Like, where have all the terrorist attacks been? You know, we've been bombing them how many times? We've been droning them, and all of a sudden, you know, we don't have none.
There are no real terrorists. First of all, the terrorists in Syria work for the United States government. There are no real terrorists here in the United States of America. That's why the FBI has to go out and find some loser with his brain melted on antidepressants and try and talk him into doing something so they can stage an arrest and say, see, we caught one, you should be afraid.
I just want to change slightly topics about, there's a new jamming radar system that they're putting on their helicopters, the Russians. It's called the Precedent S, known as the BKO, and it jams infrared, basically shoulder-fired missile systems. So look for that to it's probably already been implemented on the Mi-24s over there. But
I would presume so. There are ways to jam infrared and radar-guided missiles. It's just how much hardware is your aircraft capable of carrying that's not deliverable payload.
Man, Mike, this is just a sad. This is what have the U.S. and the British and its proxies have become just a sad thug of blowing up people and just. It's a sad to see what's going on there.
Well, again, as I mentioned before, the strategic mistake the United States has made with its weapons development program, and they made it before World War II, is they're spending huge amounts of money to build the weapons that won the last war, instead of really seeing how things are going to change here in the 21st century. Russia and China don't invest huge amounts of money in gigantic floating targets. They're designing very inexpensive weapons that are specifically designed to kill those giant floating targets.
Just the one thing that's really scary is Saudi Arabia is the one big, pretty much Wahhabist, that's where the U.S. goes to get their foot soldiers now, I guess.
The U.S. is getting them from all over the place. I mean, we know that 95% of the so-called Free Syria Army are not from Syria. They're all hired mercenaries. They're just pouring the money in there and hoping that money means victory, and they're beginning to realize, no, it doesn't. And with our economy in the condition it's in, the U.S. is going to run out of money for war very, very quickly because there's no more out here for them to take.
Yeah, how are these people going to get paid then? They're going to be coming back for payback.
Yeah, I can just see the lawsuits in court. ISIS comes in and sues for, deferred payment or with the bonus plan or whatever. They didn't give us our group health insurance. What? You don't like Obamacare?
They can always give them EBT cards. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. It's getting silly out there. Now then, story out of Politico, which we know is hardcore U.S. government propaganda, but that's why I linked to it. Story coming out here, U.S. drawing a line against Putin in Europe. NATO allies are working hard to deter Russian aggression against the Baltics. Russian aggression? Let's take a quick head count, so to speak, of how many nations the United States has invaded, drone-struck, or overthrown in the last 13 years. Russia's not the aggressor. The U.S. is the aggressor. And they actually think they can conceal that from the American people. They must have a really low opinion of all of you. They're actually still going on as if they think you're totally bamboozled and believe what they're telling you. That's dangerous because it means they could make a really, really critical mistake. I mean, look at that whopper Netanyahu did when he came out and said the Palestinians were responsible for the Holocaust. He wouldn't have said that unless he actually thought it was going to work. And boy, did he get a lesson on that. No government should ever confuse silence for consent. At the very most, it's politeness. We're stifling our laughter. Mark Milley, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, is saying that in point of fact, in a global war, Russia can destroy the United States. The U.S. isn't afraid of any other country, including China. But at a conference on security issues in the United States, he said that in a war between the U.S. and Russia, the U.S. is going to lose even if it goes to the nuclear stage. Good reason to not go to war. But those money junkies, they've already got their billion-dollar luxury prepper bunkers that they're going to go down. If this thing blows up, well, we'll just camp out underground for 6 months and we'll come up and it'll be a beautiful natural world and there'll be lots of room and it'll be beautiful just for us. One of the last Tom Clancy novels that he actually wrote himself, as opposed to parceling it out to ghostwriters and partners, was called Rainbow Six. And the storyline of that was a bunch of money junkies got together with an engineered Ebola, and their plan was to wipe out 99% of the Earth's population so they would have it all to themselves, and they'd bring back nature, and it would be wonderful. The world would be totally natural, except, of course, for their palaces. Those would still be there. Tom Clancy, in many ways, was very prescient about things that were happening in the world, going to happen in the world. Of course, he had a lot of inside information as well. Alrighty, China is going to respond to provocations in the North China Sea. The U.S. has now announced they will patrol the area around the Spratlys twice every quarter, which is of symbolic value only. China's going to fly warplanes overhead to say, we know you're there. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, I made a point of linking from WhatReallyHappened.com over to Wikipedia and their article on the Spratly Islands and their history. And it's a little long, convoluted to go through, but basically saying that at the end of World War II, China laid claim to the Spratlys because Japan had surrendered all rights to the region. And they go through the history of all the various interests that said, no, you can have them. And the short version is that since the end of World War II, the Spratly Islands have been part of China. The claims by the Philippines and Vietnam are recent and urged on by the United States as part of a program to create a conflict with China. So the U.S. dollar can reign supreme over that evil yuan and renminbi. The threat to all we hold dear in this country, along with the ruble. We're going to grab a phone call here. Bob in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Aloha.
Aloha, Nui Nui.
Yeah, hey, listen, I was wondering, you know how you can grow, you can brew beer and make wine, certain limited amount for your own consumption. Can you grow tobacco?
As far as I know.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, about the Spratly Islands, listen, there's hundreds of thousands of square miles that are less than a few meters deep, and anybody with dredging equipment can make plants.
Well, that's certainly true, but, look at the other version. If a volcano pops through the surface of the ocean near somebody's country, it's assumed that belongs to the country. We've got a new volcano off the south edge of the big island in Hawaii. It's called Loihi, and slowly it's making its way up to the surface, and when it breaks the surface, it'll be considered part of Hawaii and part of the United States of America, and the real estate people are already standing there in line with their signs, ready to stake out beachfront property.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to want to build condos there.
I don't know. People build homes in some pretty dumb areas, like those cliff tops in California. And yes, down on the Big Island, land is cheap on that southern flank there, and you can build a house and then act surprised when you find lava going through your living room.
Yeah, that would not be a nice thing. Listen, Mike, I love your show. Thank you. I'm going to let you go.
All right. Thank you very much for the kind words. We're going to let you go. Okay, moving on here to Israel. The carnage is continuing over there. A lot of children, even babies, being killed in the West Bank. Meanwhile, Israel is panicked by the global boycott on its goods. I don't think that they realize that they're just acknowledging that the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is having a huge success. And Israel is very angry with the European Union, which is now going to mandate labeling on products that are made by Israelis in the illegal settlements in the occupied territories so that smart consumers can avoid them. It's going to be a little code on the barcode. You're going to have to look for it. And Israel is screaming anti-Semite and Jew hate and all the rest of that. Meanwhile, over in Jerusalem, there are accusations that Israel is deliberately interfering with medical aid to wounded Palestinians. We saw that video just yesterday where there was an injured Palestinian on the ground, and one of the Israeli soldiers just stepped back, drew his gun, and just shot him in cold blood on the ground. So we're getting these reports from Gaza. Israeli occupation forces are blocking entrance to the hospital, blocking ambulances at checkpoints, not letting them through. There was one Palestinian who died because the Israelis wouldn't let the ambulance up to his house, and his friends tried to carry him like 2 blocks to the ambulance. And of course, being hand carried without a stretcher is going to aggravate injuries, and he died. Meanwhile, the Palestinians are commemorating or marking the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration by burning United States, British, and Israeli flags. Now then, remember yesterday I was talking about how when Israel supporters engage in these strike in the dark, stab in the back kind of tactics, try and throw people in jail for questioning the Holocaust, attack servers, wreck careers, and so forth and so on. It is actually a public admission, a confession. They know they could not win an honest debate on the facts, logic, and law. But they want what they want, and so they will attack people they perceive as their enemies because they can't win a debate against them. And one of the newest ones is this new website, this Canary Project website. And this website basically publicizes the identities of pro-Palestinian student activists all across America with the goal of denying them employment after they graduate from college. But the people who created and operate the website, they're being kept secret, which I think is a violation of the ICANN rules. And they've got this slick, professionally produced video saying it's your duty to ensure that today's radicals are not tomorrow's employees. This is a return to McCarthyism. This is blacklisting on the basis of your political point of view. That's absolutely a violation of the First Amendment right to freedom of speech, and it shows firmly that Israel and Israel supporters do not support freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of opinion. They want you to think what they tell you to think, or they will try and ruin your lives. That's tyranny. That's dictatorship. That's what Israel wants to bring to the world. Certainly has to Gaza and the West Bank. So, anyway. Story coming out of Sputnik News. Is Berlin ready to risk Washington's wrath by restoring ties with Russia? This is a follow-on to a story we mentioned yesterday, where Germany is already starting to say we're kind of sick and tired of all this sanctions nonsense. It's caused a lot more damage to Germany's economy than it has to Russia, and especially with the problems with the immigrants, Germany's economy is in serious, serious trouble. And so Germany is saying, we have to go where we can do the best for ourselves, and right now, all roads lead to Moscow. And of course, the White House is out there saying, you can't do that! I'll throw a tantrum. Meanwhile, down in Mexico, the mayor of a town in southern Mexico was caught up in an arrest with a drug gang leader. Police kicked down the door to arrest the drug gang. Mayor was sitting right there. So they've got him held under house arrest, which shows that political power has its perks and privileges in Mexico, same as here in the United States of America. Up in Ukraine, Donetsk is accusing Kiev of using Grad rocket launchers during a night shelling of Donetsk. Once again, a violation of the ceasefire, a violation of the Minsk Accords. Now, we have mentioned many times on this program and on my website over the years that legally, Hawaii is not actually a state of the United States. And Bill Clinton actually admitted it. He signed a public law saying, yeah, we kind of broke treaty and law, stealing your land, and we feel really bad about it. We're not going to give it back, but we feel really bad about it. And amazingly enough, the BBC has now picked up on the story, where they're saying, yeah, is Hawaii really a state, or is it simply an occupied nation? And of course, they're exactly right. If you read my article on Hawaii is not legally a state. And I'm very surprised that BBC would run a story like that, because it's a black eye for the U.S. government and a reminder that regime change is not a new behavior for the U.S. government, because regime change is how they got rid of Hawaii's queen, Liliuokalani, and installed a provisional government that was friendly to the United States. The U.S. government's been playing this game all along. Now, they're trying to settle the issue with the recognition that the Hawaiian people never surrendered their sovereignty. They're still technically their own nation. They're trying to convince them to be treated like the Native American nation within a nation model. I don't think it's a really good idea. But the reality is, under the letter of the law and treaties then in effect, the U.S. acquisition of Hawaii was completely illegal. But then at this stage of the game, do we really expect Washington, D.C. to follow the law when we have seen them violate the law and the Constitution so many times? Got to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're going to talk about the economy a little bit. Freddie Mac is reporting their first quarterly loss in 4 years. Now, I know the stock market is soaring. It looked like they were trying to get it over 18,000 so they could pop the champagne corks. And I got to tell you, when they treat the stock market numbers like it's a sporting event, to me that's a red warning sign that things are not on the up and up. But Freddie Mac is now in trouble. The U.S. largest banks are looking at a potential credit ratings cut by Standard & Poor's, as the U.S. government, meaning you, the taxpayer, is seen as less able to provide aid to them in a future crisis. They've hit the bottom of the barrel. We, the American people, are tapped out. We don't have enough money to bail them out. The banks in question are Bank of America, Bank of New York Mellon, Citigroup, J.P. Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, State Street, Goldman Sachs, and Wells Fargo. The too big to fail are going to fail because their backstop has always been you, the American taxpayer. They've gone to that well as many times as they can. The well is now dry. Now, over at LibertyBlitzkrieg.com, they have an article on how Bank of America, or their chief investment strategist, Michael Hartnett, is admitting the last 7 years of fiscal policy by the U.S. government has been to enrich Wall Street at the expense of ordinary Americans. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't an unforeseen circumstance. That's what it was designed to do. Prop up the banks on the backs of you, the American people. They're admitting it. They're admitting it. So what do you think Congress is going to do? Well, according to the Huffington Post, House Republicans are trying to stick a rider on bank deregulation into the highway bill. And we see Congress do this all the time. Anytime there is a must-pass piece of legislation, there's a rush to just jam it full of all kinds of things that could never pass on their own. And by the way, in the blueprint for the new America, all legislation is for one purpose only. Riders are not allowed, because those riders are responsible for some of the worst abuses of governmental procedure in the American people in history. And the House Republicans know that any more bank deregulation would not be able to stand on its own, so they're going to stick it into the highway bill. Anyway, little scandals beginning to brew. Remember the crash of 2008? It has now come out that members of Congress somehow knew it was going to happen 12 days before it hit. And there's a report that high-ranking government employees were given a heads up about the coming crash in secret meetings with the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department. And, of course, they used that information to their own profit. They liquidated their stock portfolios, engaged in short selling. Congress made a huge amount of money off of the 2008 crash. Then they turned around and soaked you for TARP. Now, one of the primary talking points used by the Department of Injustice to defend its refusal to prosecute corporate criminals is that the money they were saving from going through the process of throwing the bankers in prison was going to be used to help victimized American citizens. It isn't. As it turns out, it's going into the general fund and being spent by the government for whatever the government wants. Now, Donald Trump continues to just kill it at the polls and continue record-breaking crowds. This according to Investment Watch blog. If you're watching the corporate media, today they're out there trying to say that Carson is way ahead in across the nation, not just Iowa. Trump is now number 2. Ben Carson is out there. Ben Carson. You want to vote for Ben Carson. Actually, Hillary Clinton wants you to vote for Ben Carson because she can beat Ben Carson. She can't beat Donald Trump. Remember what Richard Nixon's committee to re-elect the president did. The whole inside story of all the president's men. They went out and they sabotaged the campaigns of Democrats who could beat Richard Nixon so that Nixon got to run against George McGovern, that he could steamroller over. And he did. And Hillary Rodham served on the Watergate Committee in Congress. She was fired from the job for lying and unethical behavior, but she got a college-level education on how to rig elections. She got to see what Richard Nixon's creep were doing, stuff that even the public wasn't told. And she's playing the same game again. Hillary Clinton doesn't dare run against Donald Trump. She wants to run against Ben Carson. And that's why they're trying very hard to throw the GOP nomination to Ben Carson. And what's really annoying is the GOP leadership hates Donald Trump so much they're willing to give away the White House. Meanwhile, according to the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, Republicans trust Trump on the economy and nuclear weapons for a very simple reason. He's actually gone out and been a successful businessman. He knows how to make business work. He knows how to make money. He knows how to be profitable. Everybody else on that platform, all they know how to do is take money from one person and give it to somebody else in exchange for votes. Now, there's another story coming on out from the Daily News bin regarding the fact that Ben Carson got caught in a flat-out lie during the third Republican debate about his relationship with Manitech, which was a company that was sued for false advertising relating to products that they were selling, health products. And Carson had claimed their products had cured his own cancer. And he said, I have not been connected with them for a long time. And of course, immediately, everybody was reporting, yeah, he was still getting money from them. He was still doing speeches for them. And according to this article that's coming out of Daily News bin, fact checkers are looking at everything Carson has set up in the debates and on his commercials, and they're finding Pinocchio after Pinocchio after Pinocchio. He is not a truthful, honest man. And I understand that's sort of par for the course for politicians, but it doesn't mean we should accept it or like it. So if you believe this corporate media claim that all of a sudden Ben Carson is leading Trump all across the nation, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. We did a check on our website. We ran a poll, Carson or Trump, as a double check on this claim. And as of the last time I looked, Trump had 97% of the vote, Carson only 3%. Anyway, the Clinton Foundation spinoff that got caught misreporting income and said, we promise we'll refile the tax returns and square this all up. Well, now they've announced, no, they're not going to do it. Apparently there's something in there they don't want to talk about, or they don't want brought to light. It gets back to that issue of skullduggery involving Hillary's very weak email server and the foundation itself. And apparently there are specific donations from foreign governments that the foundation does not want brought into the public light. Meanwhile, the CEO of Hewlett-Packard, the current one, is saying that under no circumstances is Carly Fiorina qualified to be president, looking back on how she destroyed that company. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about the current CEO of Hewlett-Packard does not have a very high opinion of Carly Fiorina, and that's probably because she almost destroyed the company when she was CEO. And I want to comment about that a little bit. My view of Hewlett-Packard was originally based on what I saw when I was working for NASA and early items I bought from them. And then when my wife and I started our production company here, Carly Fiorina was in charge of Hewlett-Packard, and we said, oh, we'll get Hewlett-Packard equipment for our shop. And it was so bad, it almost cost us our business. Computers kept locking up, hardware design problem, couldn't be fixed, couldn't be patched. CD burners would last maybe 2 weeks. They were being built in Hungary. It was almost like the storyline out of Michael Crichton's Full Disclosure. You know, female executive feminism, buy cheap products, overprice them, and if it falls apart, find somebody else to blame. And so I had a very sour opinion of Hewlett-Packard. Well, I'm going to have to be honest, that's beginning to change. And that is because my old HP 28C calculator died, and that's not a complaint. I had it for close to 20 years. And I got the new Whiz-Bang 50G. I'm very impressed with that. And I have to be very honest, recently my Hewlett-Packard Document Center that was bought on the tail end of Carly's tenure, and gave me nothing but trouble and headache, died. And I went to the store, and unfortunately the only document center I could find that would do what I needed it to do was another Hewlett-Packard. So I grit my teeth, and I bought it. But, to be very honest, this new one it's a lot better. It's a lot better than its predecessor. It hasn't given me any headaches yet. A lot of cool features. And so I'm beginning to revise my opinion of Hewlett-Packard upward. If anybody from HP is listening to this, you're off the hook. Let's grab ourselves a phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, as far as Donald Trump goes, there's no doubt that it's not only Hillary, it's the Republicans as a whole. They're just ganging up on him. They're saying all kinds of stuff about him, but yet he still is holding the ratings. And I personally think this is just one poll. I think Trump is still well ahead.
Oh, they're cherry-picking the polls. They're looking for any poll that has Trump, in decline so they can fan it all over the media and convince everybody that they shouldn't pay attention to him anymore. This is exactly the treatment they gave to Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012.
The difference, though, with Trump is that he's got his own money. He's appearing in different places around the country to really, raucous crowds, really large crowds. And I don't think people are buying what the mainstream media, and not only mainstream media, but the establishment Republican is selling. I think he made one mistake, though, Trump. I think not that he took that pledge, but I think from the get-go he should have run third party. I think he would have he would win by a landslide against both of these parties. I think at that point you probably would have had Bush run for the Republicans. It would have been Bush versus Clinton, and Trump, I think, would have won that in the landslide. It would have, it would have been almost like taking candy from a baby, because nobody wants these people in there anymore.
No, this is going to be the year of the Mavericks here. I agree with you. That was a major strategic blunder for Trump to sign that promise, because his threat to run third party was the only thing holding the GOP leadership in check. And he gave that away. And now if he doesn't get the nomination and he decides he's going to go third party, the GOP will use it to say, see, this is a man who cannot keep his promises. And I agree, it was a major strategic blunder. I don't know who Donald Trump was getting his political advice from at that point, but Trump ought to stand up there and go, you're fired.
Well, I'm saying he should have done it from the get-go. He shouldn't.
No, I disagree with that. I disagree with that.
Yeah?
I disagree with that. And because Trump as a third-party candidate and the GOP would have split the vote, and that would have guaranteed Hillary going in there. But Hillary's using the playbook from Richard Nixon, and she is engineering the GOP so that they will nominate somebody that she can easily defeat, Ben Carson.
Yeah, because Ben Carson, the guy is so soft-spoken. Now, I don't know about this Manatech, because I personally go for vitamins and things like that before I go for the big farmers' garbage that So,
yes.
So I don't know, what the deal is with Manatech, how good that stuff was or not. I never heard that he said I didn't know he even had cancer, let alone cured himself of it.
Well, that was part of what this whole false advertising lawsuit against Manatech was all about. And, we tend to sort of categorize the orthodox medical establishment as hideously driven by profit to the expense of the patient, but a lot of the so-called alternative medicine, you got to be careful. There are as many crooks out there as there are in orthodox medicine, and there are a lot of bogus claims that are being made by companies, and the government shuts them down, not always to protect the pharmaceutical industries. There's some harm out there as well, and you've got to be very, very careful. But in this particular case, the issue isn't what Manatech was doing or not doing. It's the fact that Carson was caught in a bald-faced lie saying that he had not been involved with them for many, many years. And, of course, in the age of the Internet, we flipped over our little egg timer, and sure enough, it came out that he was fibbing. And once you catch a candidate in an outright lie like that, everybody starts looking for more lies. We saw how it worked with Hillary. Now we're seeing how it works with Ben Carson.
Now, the other thing is, you're talking about Russia before and all that. I just thought today, and I think it was today or yesterday on RT, they've actually got bunker busters. Okay, I think this country. I think that the military-industrial complex and the politicians and the neocons are shocked when they see how powerful Russia really is. And you know what? Another thing, they've got a much more motivated military than they did under the Soviet Union, because now they're patriotic. They want to be in Russia. They love Russia, and they love their president on top of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
I don't think.
You need to reread Sun Tzu's The Art of War to realize why the U.S. government is in such serious, serious trouble with their war agenda.
The thing is this, too. With our troops, they got to be demoralized. I mean, they're being, sent here, there for no reason. Then they're brought back and they're wounded or something like that. They can't even get proper veterans benefits. They got to pretty much go on TV and beg for, donations and stuff. They shouldn't have to do that. They should get everything coming to them and then some. And they're not getting that. And I can't see what kind of morale.
Well, let me cut you off because we're coming up on a commercial break. It's not just the soldiers. To win at war, a leader has to have the support of the general population for them to be willing to go through the sacrifices to support that army out there. The American people are sick and tired of war. They don't want any more. They're not willing to put up with the hardships and the privations that the U.S. government needs to place them under to continue this war agenda. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Mark, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So let's talk about this immigration crisis. This is exploding totally out of control. And we're seeing all these stories that are coming out on how the migrant flow is continuing to increase, pouring into Europe. And at this point, the system of rules is breaking down. The EU rules are virtually non-existent. This is a humanitarian disaster, and it's being intentionally fanned up. Bavaria is now announcing they're going to take all the refugees jumped into Bavaria, and they're going to bus them all up to Angela Merkel's office in Berlin. Because it's really out of control. Story coming out of Sputnik News. Deep divisions in German coalition threatens Merkel's power base. Angela Merkel rules Germany at the head of a coalition government. And portions of that coalition government are now threatening to leave the coalition over the immigration issue. And that would force new elections. This is a serious, serious issue. A German official is saying Merkel's open-door migrant policy could lead to civil war. They had a huge march through one of the German cities. It took 20 minutes for all the people passing by. This was in Dresden. Over Merkel's decision to allow another 1 million refugees into Germany. Nobody knows where they're going to put them. There's no housing for them. There's no infrastructure to support them. There are certainly no jobs for them. It has reached the point where Germany's government is going to bring back the draft and draft young German people to be available to deal with the migrant crisis. And Angela Merkel is out there, and I'm not kidding you. This was reported in San Diego Union Tribune. Merkel is out there saying the world must do everything it can to meet an international goal to fight global warming, because failing to do so will increase the immigration, the refugees. It has nothing to do with U.S. wars on all these countries. It's all caused by human-caused global warming, and if we stop global warming, the refugees will stop coming. She's actually said that. Now, the Serbian ambassador to Russia, Slavenko Terzic, is saying that most of the Islamists from the Balkans are fighting in the Middle East, and Kosovo is now the open corridor for radical Islam to enter into Europe. And remember, nobody is screening these people, either for political affiliations or contagious diseases. They're just flooding on in. Interesting story coming out of The Guardian. Winter is coming. The new crisis for refugees in Europe. How ridiculous. Come on, Al Gore says it's going to be warm and toasty this winter. You know, I mean, come on. They're going to be comfortable there. Angela Merkel says they're going to be comfortable because of global warming here. To show you just how crazy this is getting, and this is an orchestrated campaign to destroy national sovereignty. Story coming out of Breitbart. Swedish news site editor, left-wing news site, is out there saying that Sweden should be flooded with ISIS so any Swedes who are opposed to immigration can be exiled. A Swedish citizen is saying, let's bring in all these refugees so that we can kick out other Swedes who don't like it. That's how over the top this is. Calais has become so dangerous near the entrance to the Channel Tunnel. British truck drivers are having to arm themselves with pepper spray and tasers because migrants are eager to get onto the trucks before they load onto those cars that go through the Channel Tunnel. And now the truck drivers are having to take steps to defend themselves. Apparently, some of the refugees on a Cyprus military base run by Britain are sick and tired of just sitting there. They're being fed, they've got beds, but not much else, and they've gone on a riot. Over on the island of Lesbos, the mayor is saying that this Mediterranean migrant carnage has claimed so many lives. The island has run out of burial space. They're literally running out of room to put the bodies of those refugees who died in the ocean or on the ground. They're out of room. It's a finite space when you're on an island. And still they're pouring in. And when you realize that it takes about 2 to 3 months to make the trip from the war zone up to Europe, unless somebody gives you a train ride, which may be happening, then you need to understand there are 2 months' worth of refugees still queued up on their way in. Now, not too long ago, there was the UN Special Representative, Peter Sutherland, and he's got him on videotape on WhatReallyHappened.com, demanding that the European Union and the United States must take in more refugees and end sovereignty. This Peter Sutherland came out and said, borders are an illusion. We don't need them. They're admitting the agenda is to end the idea of a sovereign, separate, independent nation in order to declare that we are now all ruled by a single global government and permanently enslaved to a single private central bank. They're out there openly admitting it. George Soros was saying the same thing. Soros is admitting he is funding all of these NGOs that are encouraging the refugee migration. And he's saying borders are the obstacles. We've got to take down the borders. Now, apparently, large amounts of money being spent by governments supposedly to deal with the refugee crisis at the point of origin is vanishing into the bureaucracy at the United Nations. Apparently, very little of the money is actually reaching any of the Syrian refugees. It's simply being used up by the UN on administration and staff costs. More than half the money paid by the British taxpayer has vanished into UN red tape. Remember, just the other day we were talking about these UN staffers had to be fired. They were watching child porn. They were doing drugs at the UN. One of them tried to take a chainsaw onto an airplane. It's amazing here. Here in the United States of America, interesting little tape has surfaced. Out in the city of Fontana, I think it's California. It was reported in the, it's a YouTube video. And they're out there saying that the city of Fontana is diverse. We have diversity in Fontana because 69% of the population is Hispanic. That's not diversity. Unless diversity is defined as anti-white. Because when you have 69% of the population is just one group, that's not diverse. 62% of the illegal immigrant households in the United States of America are currently on welfare. You get to pay for that, for people who legally should not be here at all. Now, the Obama administration has, we're coming up here on a commercial break here, but let me give you some background on this. The Obama administration is trying to create a condition of amnesty for the illegal immigrants, and he's meeting opposition through various groups that are going to the court system to say, look, this is illegal. The House of, Obama's exceeded his authority on a lot of these levels, and now it's coming up to where Obama's going to try and pull a fast one. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. So we're talking about one of Obama's programs to be able to allow illegal immigrants to work within the United States of America, a country that cannot find jobs for 100 million legal American citizens who'd like to work but can't find a job. And one of the ways that Obama tried to get around the law was something called the Deferral-Based Amnesty Initiative, meaning we're going to give you your work permit now and assume that somewhere down the road you'll be granted some kind of legal citizenship status. Well, this was blocked by a federal court injunction. And the court has been complaining because the administration is still handing out these work permits in direct violation of the district court's order on the same subject. So now there's a memo that has come out from the Department of Homeland Security saying that Obama is just going to go around this federal court and ignore them with another one of his executive orders. But there's a little bit of a wrinkle there. The legal constitutional function of an executive order is for the president to execute the will of the Congress. Executive orders are only binding on the executive branch. And they are not supposed to be used to circumvent the law, change the law, ignore the law, violate the law. And somebody needs to have the gonadal tissue to hold Obama to account because he's exceeding the authority of his office. Congress, which is supposed to represent the American people, as opposed to Wall Street, is supposed to create the laws. The judicial branch is supposed to make sure those laws are consistent with our Constitution. And then the president carries those orders out. That's his job. That's why it's called the executive branch. His job is to execute the will of the people, as expressed through Congress and double-checked for constitutionality by the Supreme Court. That's the way it's supposed to work. Of course, the entire federal government is completely off the reservation of the Constitution at this point. Now, over in St. Louis, a former Harris Stowe State University instructor has been awarded $4.8 million because this historically black university discriminated against this instructor because she is white. Now, the suit was filed in 2012, and it zeroed in on this particular administrator who was proven to be systematically working to purge Harris Stowe's College of Education of all white faculty. Now, the Missouri Attorney General's office defended Harris Stowe State University and is refusing comment on the verdict. But discrimination is wrong in either direction. And we're seeing a lot of problems right now in this country where everybody is all of a sudden saying it's bad to discriminate against blacks, it's bad to discriminate against Mexicans, but go ahead and discriminate against the white people. They deserve it. If discrimination is wrong, it is wrong in all directions. And you're not going to cure racism by being racist. You're not going to cure cruelty by being cruel. You're not going to cure lying with more lies. You either strike a balance that you're going to be just and fair with everybody, or you're just another political opportunist playing gotcha with the enemy. Now, over at Vassar College, there was an undercover video made where this reporter, posing as a student, stood up in a meeting and said she felt triggered and oppressed by the distribution on campus of pocket versions of the United States Constitution. And the administrators at Vassar College and Oberlin College agreed we should shred the Constitution and not allow its distribution on campus if it makes you feel oppressed. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. By the way, the PC people are on a roll right now. More things that are now declared racist: Thor, heavy metal music, and Viking cosplay. Those are now deemed racist. If you're politically correct, you will not engage in those things. Political correctness gets a lot of its impetus from this idea that if anything offends anybody on the planet, it should be banned. And you know the end result of that. A human population with no identity, no thoughts, no feelings, no opinions, which I think is the ultimate outcome of political correctness, which is literally cultural Marxism. It's not politically correct to remember the Confederacy. It's not politically correct to honor the heroics of people we don't approve of. It's not politically correct to criticize Israel. Now, there's an interesting letter, and it's posted to WhatReallyHappened.com. There's a teacher, Wendy Bradshaw, who just recently had a little girl and started thinking about teaching. And she decided she was going to resign from the school where she had been teaching, not because of the kids, not even because of her own new child, but because of absolute disgust at the way teaching is being handled now. And you should make a point of reading her letter. The headline that it's linked to, WhatReallyHappened.com, the disorder is in the system, not the children. And it is a brilliant, brilliant analysis and condemnation of the current public school system, the current indoctrination system, Common Core. It's out of control here. All right, over at Blacklisted News, new internal documents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation are revealing that these surveillance planes the agency flew over Baltimore and Ferguson during these protests operated thermal imaging equipment. A lot of people are noticing what appear to be these private airplanes with strange antennas on the bottom, and they've tracked them down as belonging to front companies operating for the government. Antennas listening to things, just developing new technologies to spy on everything that you're doing. And apparently these aircraft, the American Civil Liberties Union filed Freedom of Information Act and basically said the FBI is using these planes equipped with infrared and night vision cameras, thermographs, and they just keep the videotapes for however they want. Now, I understand that this technically is not a violation of the Fourth Amendment, because when you are out in public, there's no presumption of privacy. Same rule applies to you that applies to the police officers. But it shows just how terrified the government has become of you, the American people. When you think of the huge sums of money they're spending to keep watch on you, between drones, thermal imaging, blimps when they can stay in the sky, the NSA data centers, which we know can't catch real criminals and terrorists. It's all to watch you because the government has grown absolutely paranoid over the fact that we, the people, don't believe them anymore. All of this surveillance, all of this spying, all of this police brutality are symptoms of a government scared out of its mind of its own people. Now, there's a story in the New York Times that is responding to a recent court decision saying that for the American citizen, the Bill of Rights stops at our border. And that outside the country, the U.S. government, in this particular case, the FBI, can go ahead, detain, render, threaten, and even torture you, the American citizen. And the protection of the Bill of Rights does not apply to you once you're over that border. And of course, when they use the word render, what they're saying is the FBI can grab you in this country, ship you someplace else to be tortured. I guess that Honan Square has been shut down or it's overbooked or something and they can't torture you there. So there's something that you need to understand. The U.S. government has no respect for your rights under the Bill of Rights. They're looking for loopholes and workarounds. We have a U.S. government that engages in torture to secure politically expedient confessions, because that's all you get with torture. Concentration camps, invasions of other countries. I hate to be the one to tell you this, but the United States has become the 21st century version of the Nazis. And targeted religious minority included. We're there. We're absolutely there. And you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to confront it, acknowledge it, and then decide where to go from there. Because that's the reality. All right, we're going to take a break here for our top of the hour news and our commercials, and we'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Fox News is now paying attention to Jeb Bush, who apparently has hired a consultant away from one of the news networks to coach him on how to come across better on TV. And I can sort of see the technique, but it's very unconvincing because it's studied technique. And the spin from the Bush campaign is, don't pay any attention to those poll numbers. They really don't mean anything at all, you know. And they're trying to revive him desperately. But at this point, Bush's main backers are already bailing on him. They're going over to Rubio, and anybody who thought this was going to be a Jeb Bush-Clinton face-off, well, it's not going to happen unless there's a lot of strange one-plane accidents or crazed lone nut assassins. Now then, story that's just coming out now in the Daily Mail in Great Britain, where Ben Carson is out there campaigning that he's an outsider because he's a doctor like Ron Paul was, and he's a surgeon and he's an outsider, and that's why he's going to be good for the president. But the Daily Mail is reporting on the fact that Ben Carson has been sued for malpractice at least 6 times, including a girl who suffered permanent facial disfigurement, and another woman who basically he left a sponge inside her skull, which is something brain surgeons aren't supposed to do. There's not a lot of room in there. So Carson stepped down from his surgical position in 2013, saying, "I'm quitting at the top of my game." He's quitting before more attorneys showed up here. Story coming out of the Daily Sheeple. So far this year, and yes, it's November, the police in the United States of America have killed 1,000 people. The police always claim it's justified. Video evidence and witness statements often contradict the official narrative. Meanwhile, only 105 police officers have died since the beginning of the year. Remember, they were talking about the war on police. They're out there. They're after the police. Right now, the kill ratio for the American Police Department is almost 10-1. It's not a war on the police. It's a war by the police on you, the law-abiding American citizen. We were talking yesterday about this civil forfeiture brought against a guy for the crime of flying from Chicago to Los Angeles with a backpack. That was the entire foundation to file a civil forfeiture action against him for everything that he had. It's absurd, to say the least. All right, we're going to get on back to the area of computers and security, or insecurity as the case may be. Apple, when they released their latest iOS 9 update for the iPhone and the iPad, but mostly for the iPhone, it was heralded as the unhackable iPhone. Finally, you've got privacy, except, of course, for NSA and the rest of that. But apparently, this organization, this cybersecurity firm, Zerodium, issued a challenge to the hacker community, and they offered a huge bounty for anybody who could get past the iOS 9 security, and sure enough, they did. Now, maybe they found an exploit or a software error, or maybe they found the back doors the government is mandating in all of this hardware. And those back doors are a problem, because far from making our nation's IT system more secure, they've made it much more vulnerable. And apparently, the exploit they found for iOS 9 would give snoopers the ability to access all the data on the phone, intercept calls, eavesdrop, intercept text messages, and even live chat conversations. Now remember, the NSA has not been able to find any of these ransomware authors. The Netherlands got 2 of them. Apparently the Netherlands are better at this than the NSA. Now, iPhone sales are slowing. Yes, the iPhone 6S is a very hip little device, 4K video, 4K still camera, slow motion and high def. It's got more features than my DSLR. Would I like one? Yes. Can I afford it? Of course not. It's ridiculous. It's a $600 piece of hardware. And because of that reality, iPhone sales are poor compared to the projections. And one of the key suppliers to Apple has had to halt hiring, start thinking about letting people go. See, anytime any company gets into trouble, whether it's General Motors or Apple or whoever, it's not confined to them, because there are all the ancillary businesses that supply parts, services, equipment, whatever. They get in trouble too when they're anchored to a big client like that gets into trouble. Now, over at Superstation 95, it's a radio station, they're out there accusing Verizon of now censoring customer emails and saying that right now, Verizon, if you send an email over their system and it contains a hyperlink of any kind, it's auto-rejected as spam, even if the embedded URL is related to your business dealings or research. And apparently this began on October 27th, and it was spotted by a Verizon Fios customer, was in the middle of an email conversation about something, and all of a sudden the email started being auto-rejected. Which means if you're on Verizon, you cannot send WhatReallyHappened.com to your friends and family here. Now, a lot of people point at Linux and say it's secure, it's fast. It certainly is. I've had people who had machines running Windows where the laptop, the battery would die very quickly and it was always thrashing around, and they'll put Linux on it and it's fast and the battery lasts forever. And I've been through this myself. I had an older machine that I'd been using as a spare server, and when it was taken out of service, I formatted the hard drive and I installed SUSE Linux, and I was amazed at how fast it was compared to Windows, because it doesn't have all that junk. However, Linux is not secure. Apparently, there is a major security hole called Ghost that impacts a lot of the older versions of Linux and some current ones. And they're calling for a patch on that one. Article coming out of Forbes, no less. Microsoft is now admitting that the automatic spying functions of Windows 10 cannot be stopped. It is absolutely impossible for you, the end user, to control what Windows is sending to Microsoft and presumably the NSA. Anything that's in there about privacy options, it's window dressing. That's all. Oh, I'll put this on and I've got privacy. No, you don't. You don't. A lot of other Microsoft users are discovering that unlimited cloud storage is not, in fact, unlimited. It tops out at 1 terabyte. This is on the Office 365 OneDrive plan. It was supposed to be unlimited cloud storage. It stops. Oh my goodness, they lied. I mean, if you're limited to 1 terabyte on the cloud, why bother with the cloud? These days, single terabyte drives, they're pennies almost. And you have it under your control. You can hot dock it for your stuff and then put it in the safe and it's instantly air gapped. Anybody using the cloud for anything more important than their family photographs, you're wide open to being spied on. That's why they set it up that way. They're trying to take the world back to the model of computing of the 1970s, where all your software and your data are on giant mainframes owned by corporations and monitored by the government, and your personal electronic device is nothing more than a terminal. Got to take a break for commercials. We got somebody waiting on the phone, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about computers and security. And we're seeing this huge, raging debate over encryption, both in the United States and in Great Britain. And we're constantly being told that the governments don't want to ban encryption completely. They just want to ban encryption they can't look at. Which is kind of like being told that you should give copies of all your house keys to your local police station and just trust that they won't come in and do bad things. Now, there's a new concern that's growing over a class of encryption that is basically the point of encryption is right at the users. It's not going to someplace else to be encrypted, which is, of course, wide open to man-in-the-middle intercepts. And the UK government is just coming back and saying that if we can't read it, it can't be allowed to the general public. Now, we already know that the NSA can't find real cyber criminals, can't find the ransomware writers. Netherlands could, NSA cannot. The FBI's official recommendation for ransomware is if your machine is infected, just go ahead and pay it because they can't do a thing about it. The Netherlands did. They have already released unlocking software for everybody who was hit by the ransomware that they just busted. FBI couldn't do that. NSA couldn't do that. CIA couldn't do that. Kind of makes you wonder if the ransomware, like traffic ticket quotas or civil forfeiture, is just another device by the U.S. government to plunder the American people. Because the government is dead broke. They don't even want to admit to you the true scale of the debt, just like they don't want to admit to you the true scale of unemployment in this country. So the debate is raging on, but in the end, and we proved this with our NSA challenges a while back, real criminals, real terrorists can come up with their own systems of encryption the NSA cannot break. So all of this NSA spying, GCHQ spying, mandating that you use weak encryption and have backdoors in your systems is about watching the law-abiding citizenry of our countries, because the governments have become terrified of you because you don't believe what they tell you anymore. You don't trust them. You don't worship them. And they're scared about that. Now, the FCC has issued a fine to Hilton Hotels, $25,000, not too bad. Apparently, Hilton Hotels have been accused of intentionally jamming customers' mobile Wi-Fi hotspots, forcing customers to pay for Hilton's Wi-Fi services. Now, you know there are these little pocket devices you can get that go over the 4G LTE, and they act as a portable hotspot for all your devices. Most smartphones now have that capability built in. Apparently, Hilton Hotel was intentionally jamming that so that you would have to pay them to use their Wi-Fi services. And the FCC launched an investigation. Hilton Hotels has basically been delaying, obstructing the probe, and that's why the FCC fined them. Now, as I mentioned, this is over at the Hackers News. The Netherlands have now released a free decryption tool for anybody who is a victim of either CoinVault or BitCryptor ransomware. And again, the Netherlands could do it. NSA could not. FBI could not. CIA could not. Which tells us that the CIA, NSA, and FBI are really just a huge waste of money. I mean, all the FBI is doing, the FBI isn't out looking for real criminals. They're too busy setting up patsies for phony terrorists. Anyway, Britain may be forced to back off from their proposal that would give the police full access to everyone's internet search history held for an entire year without a warrant. Public outcry on that one has been huge. And you know something? This goes into the category of, I think it's a giant bluff to scare you all. Because they're always talking about, well, if you're looking for a needle in a haystack, you got to have the whole haystack. Well, in this case, they're just throwing more hay in there. And whereas the acquisition and storage of this data is linear over time, correlating among that data is an unlimited expansion. And the NSA may have all the hard disk room that they need to collect all the world's telephone calls for the last 7 years, and text messages and emails. I don't think they can really extract anything useful from it. There is simply too much data. They're drowning in the wealth of the volume of the data. They can't make sense of it. Recent survey is showing 77% of 2-year-old children are now using some form of mobile device on a daily basis. Now, this article is saying, ooh, that's a bad thing. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I remember long before I got Claire her iPad, I'd taken her out to a restaurant, and the booth next to us was a family, and they had a little tiny kid, 2.5, on an iPad, and just whizzing right along, and I was very impressed. It is a new world and a new technology and a new means of information transfer, and the younger kids get used to it, the better they're going to be. It's like learning to type when I was a kid. The sooner you learn it, the more productive you're going to be. And it's kind of a mark of the integrated product that we get from Apple, that it's easy to learn by little kids. I've had a chance to look at the Apple product. I've had a chance now to look at the Android. And in terms of an end-user-friendly appliance that's fully integrated, hardware and software, I have to give Apple the victory on that one over the Android devices. All right, so we're coming up here on the bottom of the hour. We've got half an hour yet to go here. Let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. And I am not kidding you. This story was over in Bloomberg, no less. Climate change kills the mood. Actually, there was a report that came out by the National Bureau of Economic Research saying that global warming decreases sex. That lowers birth rate. That affects our gross domestic product. Global warming will end your sex life. And it got picked up all over the corporate media here. And that's nonsense, because my experience growing up was the warmer the weather is, the easier it is to talk your date out of her clothes. So I don't know where they're coming from with this whole situation. It's just more booga booga. This is propaganda leading up to that climate summit in Paris. More about that when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I want to backstep a little bit. I've got people who are sending me a lot of updates on some of the things we're talking about here. And the proposed law in Great Britain would ban all end-to-end encryption, which is if you are encrypting it at user A and user B is decoding it, it is banned. Which, I mean, let's be serious. Encryption is supposed to work that way. The British law is saying you can use encryption if it goes through some central server. There is a concern that if this bill actually passes, it will mean that the iPhone will not be able to be legally sold in Great Britain, because as of iOS 9, it uses a lot of end-to-end encryption. It's encrypted on your device in your hand, and it is not decrypted until it reaches the other end. And this UK surveillance law would also ban some online services that use end-to-end encryption. This surveillance bill bans encryption of chats. They want it wide open so they can see what people are chatting about. That would affect Facebook, Snapchat, all of those. George Orwell was right when he issued his warning. Now then, there's another story coming on out here. Twitter accounts used for government propaganda, and we've seen a lot of these already. And it's a common phenomenon. There was a Twitter account in Turkey that started out with a picture of a very attractive woman with exposed cleavage and just a lot of fluff. And because of the picture of the woman, gathered 40,000 followers. Now, all of a sudden, it's changed, complete makeover, and it's now an organ for the government of Turkey with which to attack their opposition. So we see a lot of that going on. Set up a Twitter account or a Facebook page with some kind of bait or lure, get a huge number of followers, and then turn it into a propaganda machine. Now, responding back to the comment about global warming decreasing sex drive, somebody wrote in a very astute comment. Somehow the people in Africa and in India didn't get that memo, or Mexico, because they have very high birth rates there. Like I said, the warmer it is, the easier it is to talk your date out of her clothes. It was a stupid idea. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. We're talking to Higgs boson in New York, or a reasonable facsimile thereof. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing? Mike, I'm hearing some kind of funky stuff coming from both sides of the whole issue behind Putin. Now, the first issue that was brought to my attention was somebody made a claim that Putin has actual Holocaust denial laws in Russia. Mm-hmm. Now, I kind of researched it, and I found that it's kind of like weasel wording. They kind of say there's no really mention of Holocaust, but they say in Russia you can't deny the Soviets' involvement in World War II, and you can't deny something to the effect of I forget what it is. Nazi Germany's war crimes. Mm-hmm. So now, is that the same thing? Because
no, it isn't. Like no, it isn't.
Okay.
But what's going on here is Putin enjoys not only immense support among his own people, he's very popular around the world and here in the United States of America. And by saying he's, passing Holocaust denial laws, they're trying to basically sever popular support from here in the U.S. A while back, they tried this idea that Putin had passed laws against the gays, and that one turned out to be completely bogus as well.
Okay, so it's definitely not true.
It's Russia bashing, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, because it's just like Mike. When dealing with truth, I am open to just pretty much anything that's pretty much reasonable. If it sounds a little too crazy to believe, I research it, and then I just dismiss it. I like to, check on, both ends of the spectrum. And the fact that, I've reached out to this person, I said, hey, listen, that doesn't make any sense, because why would Russia be in Syria, bombing Israeli assets, which is ISIS? Think about the overall narrative that is being pitched back to Americans.
That's kind of a little bit loose here, because even if you accept at face value the story of the Holocaust, that all happened before most of us were born. It was an entirely different group of people on both ends of that, and it's got nothing whatsoever to do with the actions of Israel's government today, even though Israel, of course, is trying to say everything we do is justified by the Holocaust and the Nazis. But that's beginning to fall apart, especially since Netanyahu tried to blame the Holocaust on the Palestinians.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay, Mike, that's all I got for today. I just want your perspective on that. Thank you.
All right. A lot. Thank you very much. Yeah, the Russia bashing is going on absolutely nonstop. I mean, the United States is in a very awkward position. Russia has been invited into Syria by the government. The U.S. has not. And they don't want the American people thinking about that. So they want to demonize Russia any way that they can so that the American people will say, well, we don't care about law and we don't care about treaty. We're good. They're bad. That gives us the right to do what we're going to do. And when you look at the ludicrousness of trying to spin the crash of the Metrojet in Sinai as ultimately Putin's fault for going into Syria, tells you how desperate they are to find anything that they can destroy Putin's image with, because he is seen as a global statesman right now. And not only is Russia's military outclassing America's military in Syria, Putin is outclassing Obama and pretty much everybody in charge of Europe right now. So we're going to hear stories about how Putin is torturing little kittens, or, you know, Putin is tap dancing barefoot on shag carpeting, or whatever they can come up with and make it sound like he's just icky poo and we should not like him. Now then, getting on back to human caused global warming. Article coming out of PatriotRising.com. Environmental economist Richard Tall, and that title alone tells you global warming is all about money and not the environment. And Richard Tall is out there in support of we've got to fight global warming, but he is admitting his data is showing that so far the climate policies being implemented in rich countries don't really do anything about the environment. They're basically making the favored industries and those with political connections richer at the expense of everybody else. Gee, you think? Remember all the money poured into Solyndra and the windmill and the all of that stuff, and it didn't work, but they got rich on taxpayer dollars. All the green projects, but the green wasn't earth, the green was money. The whole system is a fraud. Carbon trading was set up by Al Gore with the assistance of Ken Lay to do to planet Earth with electricity. To do to planet Earth with carbon dioxide what Enron did to California with electricity. It was a scam from the get-go. It's made Al Gore very, very rich. All the players on the inside got rich. The scientists supporting it got rich on grant money. And those who were critical of it, you're outside. You're outside the mainstream. Your funding is cut off. Go away and offend no more. And this guy, the lead author from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is out there admitting all of the policies implemented to fight global warming have done nothing but take money away from you and give it to the politically connected, the cronies. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today here. Before we head on out, we're talking about human-caused global warming. And I had to laugh at this story that came out from MSN.com. Headline, Sweden projected to lose 40 to 80 days of snow as climate warms. And the tagline on this one is, snowy white winters are likely to become a thing of the past for most Swedes. Now, where have we heard that before? We heard it back on March 20th, 2000 in the UK Independent. Snowfalls are now a thing of the past. We got hammered by several record-setting winters after that. All of this that you are seeing in the corporate media, and they're still trying to claim 2015 was the hottest year on record. It's all leading up to this climate summit in Paris. And the goal of that climate summit is to impose a global carbon tax on us all, to raise money for desperately broke, hopelessly in debt governments, but more than that, to impose another system of economic control over the world. It's a new form of hegemony, where the environmental authority will decide what countries get to sell their oil and gas and what countries don't get to. That's what it's really all about. So, we'll see what this winter is going to be. I mean, there's already snow happening. The stuff that we were told was a thing of the past, it's already starting. We have a month to get through till Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is usually when we get the good measure. And I would not be at all surprised for the corporate media to not report heavy snow, because they've been given their marching orders. You will sell the world is warming because we need to get those suckers to pony up more money in a carbon tax. That's the goal. Another hand into your pocket. And apparently Hillary Clinton is out there screaming that Exxon is funding the global warming deniers, and if that's the case, somehow my checks got lost in the mail. But it was a rather interesting little timing because Exxon was a regular contributor to the Clinton Foundation, and it was only when they stopped funding the Clinton Foundation that Hillary got on her high horse and said, we must investigate Exxon for funding the global warming deniers. You know, the irony is, it's the people pushing global warming who are raking in the dough. Grants to scientists, TV exposure, book deals, huge amounts of money. Global warming. Even that lead author from the IPCC is saying that all of the policies put in place to deal with global warming amount to taking money away from ordinary people and heaping it up all over these green industries that are being run by contributors to the president and members of Congress. And they really don't work very well. Now, I'm very concerned about the environment, especially all that depleted uranium and all the artillery shells flying back and forth. I believe in the wise use of resources. But we have seen way too many times environmentalism used as a marketing tool to get you to pay more money for poorer quality products. And I remember many, many years ago, I was working in downtown Honolulu. I was working on Final Fantasy. And I had a little battery-driven tape player. You remember tape, a long time ago. And I used to use ordinary batteries in it, and a set of batteries would last me 3 or 4 days. And then everybody came out and said, environmentalism, you want to buy these new non-polluting batteries that were twice as expensive and would last exactly 1/2 hour. So when you see somebody who's out there screaming about, you must do this to protect the environment, you got to pay close attention. Because obviously if you're buying and throwing away 6 sets of environmentally friendly batteries for every 1 set of the original kind, you may not actually be helping the environment. It's just another marketing scam. You really need to be, and of course global warming is the biggest marketing scam of all. Now, the EPA is finding that more and more cars were engaging in having software in their cars to cheat the emissions tests. Software that would determine when the car was being emission tested, configure the engine one way, determine when the owner was driving and configure the engine the other way for better performance. Audi and Porsche have been pulled into this whole mess. And this may be one of the reasons why all these automakers were screaming that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act meant that you as the owner of a car were not allowed to look at the software in it. They knew they were hiding something. They were cheating. Of course, now the Library of Congress is saying that in point of fact, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act prohibits you from copying off your car's software to give or sell to somebody else, but it is perfectly legal for you to go in and tinker with it yourself. Obviously, don't do that unless you know what you're doing. But I think a lot of these corporations that are screaming the Digital Millennium Copyright Act says you may not look at the software embedded in your device has more to do with things being in that software they don't want you to know are there. Like spyware, tracking, rigging the emissions tests. Now, TransCanada has now asked the United States to suspend the application for the Keystone Pipeline. Huge controversy going on over there. And it appears to be more of a timing situation where TransCanada has decided to wait for Obama to leave office at the end of next year and hope that whoever is going to take his place is going to be more amenable to the Keystone Pipeline. So they're just going to sit and wait for 14 months and hope to get a better reception. Speaking of Canada, tomorrow, November 3rd, Gilad Atzmon will take the stand as an expert witness to testify on behalf of Arthur Topham and RadicalPress.com. And he's a star witness. Everybody knows who he is, both because of his saxophone music and his record albums, and because of his long stance on the situation in Israel and Palestine. And I am hoping that in light of the new Prime Minister Trudeau's promise to take a look at Bill C-51 and pull out these special laws trying to declare that criticism of Israel's government behavior represents anti-Semitism, hopefully the judge in this case against Topham is going to say, freedom of speech means you have a right to criticize things that you think are wrong. And of course, that's what freedom of speech is there for. The First Amendment here in the United States of America isn't there to protect naked girls on brass poles or canvases in art galleries with bovine poo stuck to them. It is the right of all people to criticize government without fear of retaliation. And that has to apply not just to our government, but the government of Israel as well. And Israel is trying to take that away, proving once again, Israel does not believe in freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of idea. Israel wants you to believe what you're told to believe. And that is tyranny. Now, over at Fukushima, after all these years of evasions and dodging, they're finally having to acknowledge that the Fukushima plant is dumping nuclear waste into the Pacific Ocean on a daily basis. There's no foreseeable end to it. Nobody has any ideas on how to stop it. Former World Health Organization official is saying this is hopefully out of control. TEPCO is trying a new approach with the construction of seaside walls to block the water from seeping into the sea. They don't know how well it's going to work or if it's going to work at all. Remember the ice wall idea? That came and went. The problem is the plant and the beach are built on very loose soil and sand. And the water can, I don't care how deep that barrier goes, the water can seep under it or flood over the top if there's enough of it. And finally, last study, apparently over, well, you know something? I'll leave this for tomorrow. It's a vaccine study. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Share what you know with everyone you know, in particular if they're not on the web or listening to independent media. It's time to reach out to people who are asking what has gone wrong with this country. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.